Welcome, my friends. Today I'm going to narrate some conspiracy theories to help you fall asleep. But first, please like and subscribe to the channel. Also, comment down below where you're watching from. Thanks. It began like any other night. Window cracked for air, city humming low outside, the lamp on my desk casting soft amber across hotel wallpaper, older than it should be. But just as I settled in, I noticed something odd in the recording. I always filmed a time-lapse from the window, some personal ritual, a digital keepsake of passing days. But when I reviewed the footage, frame 217 was missing, not glitched, just gone, a jump like a breath skipped, and the timestamp jumped forward by exactly 4 seconds, cleanly, unnaturally, like time had politely stepped aside. I told myself it was compression, bad file integrity, anything mundane, but even then, something about it itched at me, like a name you should remember but can't. And as I stared longer, I noticed something else. My reflection in the glass wasn't synced with me. It blinked too late, then too early, like it was remembering the rhythm wrong. I didn't sleep well that night, not from fear, not yet, just that strange discomfort of something slightly misaligned, like shoes on the wrong feet or someone saying your name in a dream you don't remember having. The next morning I went looking, not out of fear, but a dull, compulsive curiosity, and found myself combing through old backup drives I hadn't touched in years, tucked into a zipper bag beneath a suitcase I barely recognized. I loaded them up, expecting nothing but travel photos, receipts, old invoices, but I found folders I didn't name, logs dated on days I know I was offline, and audio clips labeled with coordinates, not titles. One in particular, 14114 312E, was corrupted but played anyway. A soft rustling, some breathing, then my voice, calmer than I've ever sounded, saying, "Don't look too far left," followed by what I can only describe as the sound of glass forgetting how to break. I sat back, numb, while the lamp flickered once and steadied. And something inside me whispered that I'd heard that phrase before, in a dream, maybe, or someone else's memory. It didn't make sense, none of it did, but it didn't feel like a mistake. It felt like something carefully left behind, buried in dust and disinterest, waiting for the right version of me to start listening. I started tracing digital fingerprints, cross-referencing file signatures, tracking IP paths that looped impossibly back into government servers, supposedly decommissioned in the 90s, ones tied to MK Ultra documents that were released, and then unreleased, where scanned pages bled ink as if censoring themselves in real time. I found names erased mid-sentence, operations never named aloud. Project overlap, mirror zone, cradle echo, tied to quiet buildings that don't show on Google Earth and disappear from FOIA requests like smoke. Everything pointed back to room 14. This room, the one I was in, which hadn't existed on the hotel's official blueprint until 2003, though the structure was built in 1968. I found floor plans overwritten in grayscale, showing different room numbers on different days. Guests assigned here never stayed long, and most of their names don't show up in the ledger at all. I started keeping the TV on static, just for the background noise, but last night, through the fuzz, I heard a voice saying my own name like it was trying it on for size, and I didn't recognize it as mine until it laughed. I broke into the storage room in the basement, more out of compulsion than courage, and behind a fake wall of wine crates was a locked server cabinet, dust thick and humming faintly like it remembered when to breathe. Inside were tapes, old, VHS reels with no labels, just Sharpie numbers and a stack of playback logs in typewriter font dated before I was born. I played one reel in an old machine left running next to the rack. It showed this hotel, this room, but from angles impossible to place, like someone filmed from inside the walls. I watched a man sit on this same bed, wearing my face but older, with different eyes that didn't blink. He looked straight into the lens and said, "If you're hearing this, you're a copy too." And then the screen fuzzed, warped, distorted into a stretched grin of static that kept grinning even when the tape stopped. In the silence that followed, I heard the sound of my door unlocking from the inside. I tried to send the footage, to upload the files, anything, emailed myself, mirrored drives, even burned discs. But everything came back corrupted, names misspelled, clips cutting short with eerie precision like something erasing itself just fast enough. I reached out to a journalist I'd known, someone who once told me the truth only matters when people still care. But she never replied, and her website now redirects to a corporate food chain, even in the forums, the ones buried deep in the web's dust. The threads referencing Room 14 are suddenly gone. 404s where posts used to be, even the usernames wiped. Someone knocked on my door last night, but left no sound, and when I checked the hall, the air felt off, as if time had stretched long enough for someone to pass through without being seen. I stood there for a while, watching the corridor breathe, thinking maybe truth isn't what we uncover. It's what we're still afraid to say out loud, even when no one's listening. I left the hotel, or tried to, and found myself back at the same corner no matter where I turned, the streets folding in on themselves with patient indifference. I realized the night no longer had an ending, just different shades of dim. I went back to room 14 and finally noticed the mirror had no reflection. Not mine, not anyone's, just a depthless grey that pulsed faintly when I got too close. The final file was hidden inside an image, a dead pixel buried in a JPEG header that unfolded into an audio file marked Origin. And when I played it, it was just my voice saying, "You died in 2019, this copy is deteriorating, sleep now." I don't remember dying, but I also don't remember a lot of things like why my memory resets every 72 hours, or why I sometimes wake up crying over people I don't know. I think the betrayal wasn't that someone did this to me, but that I agreed to it once and left just enough behind to remember I was never supposed to. Some nights I hear them, the other versions, shuffling in the walls, whispering fragments of lives I never lived. A daughter's name, a promise broken, a garden that only grows in dreams. I stopped trying to contact the outside world, because I'm no longer sure there is one, not the way I remember it. Maybe I'm still inside the program, or maybe this hotel is the program, a looped limbo made of rooms and regrets. The files have stopped erasing themselves, maybe because there's no one left to hide them from, or maybe because they were never hidden at all, just waiting for someone to sit still long enough to listen. I don't know if I was the first or the last, or if those words even mean anything. I arrived just after dusk, engine ticking with desert heat, the sky stretched out in faded orange, almost torn at the edges, and the sign buzzing faintly above the office read, "The Long Night Motel," a name I don't remember seeing on the map, but there it was, plain as anything. Check-in was quiet. The clerk didn't speak much, just slid me a key marked 7 and nodded toward a row of identical doors, each painted dull red, each casting a shadow that didn't match the light. The room itself was ordinary. Brown, carpet, static-laced TV, rusted bathroom mirror. But when I closed my eyes that night, I heard faint whispering through the wall, like someone softly arguing with themselves. When I opened my door the next morning, the hallway stretched in the wrong direction, slightly longer than it had been, and door 8 had changed. Different number, same spot, and I could have sworn just for a second it had my name carved, faintly, into the wood. I walked past the office, trying to retrace the layout, but it didn't make sense. The parking lot had more cars than the night before, yet I hadn't heard a single engine. Door 9 now faced west instead of north, and the vending machine beside it hummed with an old song I couldn't place, though I found myself humming along. Back in my room, I found a manila folder inside the desk drawer, marked only with my initials and a date I didn't recognize. Inside were surveillance stills, blurry photos of me from unfamiliar angles, timestamps that contradicted my memory, and a motel receipt from a version of this place that looked newer, cleaner, and one page that simply read, "You are approaching divergence threshold. Choose wisely." The lights flickered once, then stabilized, and outside I thought I saw someone standing at the edge of the lot staring, before vanishing between frames like bad film. I started digging into the motel's history, using what signal I could steal from the office router. Searches that once returned nothing now brought up strange, fragmented results. Fragments of declassified memos, half-buried case files from defunct agencies, diagrams of buildings that didn't exist on paper before 1973. One name kept reappearing, Project Dusk Hour, attached to temporal realignment studies, identity fracturing, and one document that included motel floor. Plans eerily similar to mine, only mirrored. In those blueprints, room 7 had no back wall, just a hatch marked Access Node. B, I found grainy footage on a forgotten video sharing site, shaky cam, distorted audio, someone whispering, "Rooms shift based on regret," followed by screaming. Cut short. I couldn't stop watching, even when my screen began showing faint reflections of me that weren't synced. Versions blinking late, smiling wrong, out of time. I broke into the utility shed behind the last room, drawn by the flicker of CRT monitors through cracked slats. Inside was a mess of cables, old broadcast equipment looping static feeds from every room, angles that shouldn't be possible, showing versions of guests I hadn't seen enter, some weeping, some frozen mid-action. I turned one knob and heard my own voice, breathless and broken, saying, "It's not a motel, it's a filter." Each feed warped slightly as I moved, bending, light and sound, until one monitor flickered and showed me sitting at the desk in my room right now, but I wasn't alone. Someone stood behind me, grinning too wide, too still. A figure I couldn't remember but felt intimately afraid of. The power cut out for exactly 7 seconds, and when it returned, the monitors were all blank. I tried leaving, packed my bag, walked to the edge of the lot, but every path curved inward, every road folded until I was standing again in front of my door, sweating, shaking, eyes refusing to track the horizon line that now bent slightly upward. I uploaded what files I could, sent audio notes to every number I remembered, but one by one my accounts failed, inboxes locked, numbers no longer in service. The front office was empty now, and the clock behind the desk blinked Idle, whoa, pow, in a rhythm that matched my heartbeat. I caught my reflection in the dusty office glass. It stared back too long, like it was deciding something. And behind it, another room, lit wrong, a different version of me speaking silently to someone I couldn't see. I said aloud, "What, if truth only matters to those still awake?" And the room, impossibly, nodded. By midnight, the sky had gone completely black. No stars, no moon, just depthless dark pressing against the windows. I found a door marked Room 0, one I hadn't seen before, and stepped through into a place where time stuttered, every tick of the clock stretching longer than the last. There were versions of me lined up along the hallway, some dead-eyed, some pleading, one laughing quietly like he'd made peace with it. I made it to the last room, where a man in my skin said nothing, just handed me a photo of a life I don't remember living. A family, a child, sunlight on a porch that doesn't exist here. He pointed at the rising horizon. Not a sun, but something else brighter and wrong. And I knew then I had to choose, step through the frame and risk becoming something else, or stay and fade. Now I sit in the room, whichever version this is, and wait for a knock that may never come. I no longer sleep, just listen to the hum in the walls, the soft loop of old voices arguing over which life was real. I don't know if I chose right, or if choice was ever real to begin with. Sometimes the lights flicker, and the door handle turns slowly, but no one enters. Maybe they're watching. Maybe they're waiting for me to forget. Or maybe I already did, and this is what's left of me, a flicker between frames caught in a story with no final page. The motel still stands in the desert, unseen, unchanged, and somewhere out there the sun rises for someone else. It started with an echo in the security logs, something small, a 2-second blip in a hallway camera feed I'd watched 100 times before, a ripple in the audio that shouldn't have been there, like someone else breathing behind the lens, right where no one stood. It was late, past midnight, the building humming with fluorescent stillness, and I was doing what I always did, monitoring, reviewing, cataloguing. But this time the feed hiccuped, looped for a moment, and in that loop was a face I didn't recognize wearing a badge with my name on it. I paused, rewound, froze the frame, but when I looked again it was gone, just grainy pixels and a flicker of static like any other recording glitch. But something in me felt snagged, like a thread had caught on a nail and started to pull without me realizing it. I started digging through the archive, pulling logs from that night and the nights before, watching the timestamp crawl past in slow, sleepless silence. And the deeper I went, the more things slipped sideways, doors opening with no one near. Them audio that sounded reversed, a hallway light flickering in what looked like a Morse rhythm I couldn't decode. I found a cache buried behind an admin-only directory, labeled with initials I didn't recognize, filled with unsorted clips, corrupted documents, unreadable strings of code, except one file, a text note dated the night of the particle test, 1 hour after the failure. And all it said was, "They're not us, but they want to be." I stared at that sentence until the words seemed to fold into themselves, and for the first time I realized I wasn't the only one watching. It unraveled slowly like everything important does. Old whistleblower forums archived on defunct servers, fragments of testimony hidden inside game files, Project Bluebird scans mislabeled under agricultural grants. I traced connections between the dimensional event and older experiments in neural duplication, some tied to MK Ultra offshoots in Eastern labs, others linked to military contractors who no longer existed on paper but had funded psychographic research through shell non-profits. The pattern was erratic but real. Test subjects reported missing time, memories that weren't theirs, dreams where they were watching themselves from inside another body, and some were found days later, catatonic, repeating coordinates over and over until their tongues bled. Every lead I followed circled back to one phrase. Resonant displacement protocols authorized under Omega clearance. And I began to wonder if we hadn't broken through something. We'd just let it in. The old server room hadn't been touched in years, sealed off after the flood in Sector C, but I pried open the rusted hatch and stepped into the staleness of forgotten machines and half-dead fans spinning like they were too tired to quit. I booted up one of the towers and the screen stuttered to life, spitting static across the glass before a file tree appeared. Untitled, unstructured, just fragments of surveillance footage, corrupted logs, and audio layers that bled into each other like overlapping nightmares. I found one clip labeled Mirror Archive Usul 1. I played it, and the image jolted between two camera angles, both showing the same hallway, the same time code, but two versions of me walking in opposite directions, both looking over their shoulder, like something was just behind them, something unseen. Then came the audio, a whispering sound like distant voices behind static, all saying the same phrase. You're already gone. I tried to send the footage, burned it to 3 encrypted drives, uploaded one to a drop server, left another in a library book, mailed the third to someone I once trusted before they disappeared from every system I checked. But the response came quick and quiet. My work access revoked, emails returned empty, the server tower gone when I returned the next night, as if it had never existed. I called the few who might believe me, but their numbers rang hollow, voicemails overwritten with digital screeching or silence, too complete to be accidental. One message got through, a voice I barely recognized whispering, "You're not the first to see it. You won't be the last to vanish." And then nothing but humming, low and constant, like the sound of power lines in deep snow. I sat in the dark and thought, what if truth only matters to those still awake? The last place left was the tunnel under the test chamber, the one they sealed after the failure, claiming structural risk, but I'd seen the blueprints, and the blueprints didn't match what I found. Inside was a long corridor lined with cables that pulsed faintly like arteries beneath skin. And at the end, behind a decayed panel, a screen flickered to life, showing surveillance feeds from rooms that didn't exist in this building, or maybe in this version of it. Each feed showing versions of people I knew or thought I knew, walking, working, speaking lines I remembered from conversations that hadn't happened yet. In one feed, I was there too, standing still while another me wrote something on a whiteboard. We came through broken. I started until I felt something behind me, not a person, but a presence. And I didn't turn, I just asked, which of us walked out first? I left the building at dawn, if it was even dawn, and the sky looked wrong in a way I couldn't name, too flat, too still, like a painting of light instead of the thing itself. I don't know what I am anymore, if I was. replaced, rewritten, or if I was always just a copy of someone else's script waiting to be played out. But I keep moving, keep watching, because the echoes are everywhere now. In the news clips that replay different endings, in voices that answer before I speak, in faces that flinch when they see mine. I've stopped trying to warn anyone. The ones who understand don't need telling, and the ones who don't are already gone in ways they haven't noticed yet. Somewhere out there, the original version of me may still be searching, still hoping, but I don't think we'll ever meet, because the truth is, some echoes don't fade, they replace. I was reviewing a lecture recording Tuesday afternoon, third year quantum field theory, when I noticed something that didn't belong. A name written in chalk on the side of the whiteboard that I hadn't written, in handwriting that mimicked mine but not quite. Like someone had studied me without fully understanding the rhythm of my strokes. The name was familiar and foreign at once, G.V. Callahan, and though it rang no bells, I found myself mouthing it under my breath as the fluorescent lights above flickered once, then settled into silence. I scrubbed back through the footage and it was gone, just like that. No chalk, no name, just my voice and the quiet scratch of a marker against the board, the moment erased or never there to begin with. And yet, for reasons I couldn't explain, I couldn't let it go. It itched at something in me, not like a mystery, but like a memory I hadn't made yet. It started with a folder mislabeled under an old grant archive, Acoustics Mid-Range Distortion, which had no business being linked to my quantum timeline datasets. But there it was, nested in the wrong place, like someone had tried to hide it and forgot how. I opened it expecting junk, misfiled sound recordings or test waveforms, but instead found a handful of handwritten notes scanned into PDFs, pages warped and stained like they'd been copied from much older paper. They spoke in clipped, technical phrases about timeline intervention anchors, selective historical modulation, and something called the Bellum switch. None of it made complete sense, not yet. But one phrase stood out in bold at the top of every page. Only the tethered remember. That night I dreamed of ancient cities burning under cold stars, while a voice, not mine, kept whispering years that didn't exist. I traced the documents through back-end research channels and got flagged twice. Nothing dramatic, just subtle. Lockouts, credentials that stopped working, login delays I couldn't replicate when I called IT, but it was enough to make me cautious. The author, G.V. Callahan, had no academic footprint, but his name surfaced in a few declassified files buried in the aftermath of Operation Paperclip, mostly redacted, but still traceable through procurement records and silent sub-projects within. MK Ultra's Periphery, things about mass memory displacement experiments and culture steering at a population scale. One document described a Soviet defector who insisted that all major global events were hand-spun threads, re-looped, until humanity accepted limitation as destiny. Another simply read, "Our true direction must be turned against itself every 100 years, or they'll find the breach." I started watching the world differently after that. News segments, museum plaques, even the dates on coins felt rehearsed, too neat to be real. I broke into the East Archive after midnight, bypassed a broken RFID reader with a magnetized strip from my old faculty ID, and stepped into a silence that felt preserved rather than abandoned. Old racks, dusty air, fans, that hadn't turned in years, and an ambient hum I felt more than heard. I found a monitor still plugged in, powered by a dying auxiliary line, and when I booted it up, the screen flickered, filled with static, then cleared enough to reveal a set of audiovisual files dated decades apart, but all marked with the same title: Temporal Containment Briefing, Eyes Only. I played one, audio only, and heard a voice list, battle dates and treaties with calm precision, then pause and say, reset authorized, variant force suppressed, outcome compliant. And then there was silence, but under it, if I turned the volume high enough, a second voice was whispering something else, layered beneath the speaker, not quite English, not quite human, but urgent, like it was pleading. I compiled what I could, notes, files, voice samples, and timelines that no longer matched the current record, and uploaded a secure copy to a dead man's server I'd kept since grad school, just in case. Then the gap started forming. Appointments I never made appearing on my calendar, colleagues referencing conversations I'd never had, and one morning my reflection blinked before I did. I sent a message to a physicist I trusted in Geneva. His response was brief. Don't send anything more. They're folding iterations faster than we can catalogue them. Then he disappeared from every academic registry I could search as, if erased, not fired. That night I walked the campus alone, just listening. Every light buzzed slightly out of sync, every shadow hung longer than it should have, and I found myself wondering, what if truth only matters to those still awake? I found Callahan, not the man, but what was left of him, deep in a disused archive linked through his last published coordinate models, folded between a theory on multi-point convergence and a handwritten confession. The letter was brittle, dated in a format I didn't recognize, but its message was simple. Time is not linear. It is told. And those who tell it are not from here. The confession detailed how certain events had been forcibly repeated, sometimes a dozen times, just to ensure specific reactions, wars, panics, discoveries, delayed or destroyed. He wrote that humanity had reached full conscious potential 3 separate times, and each time it had been turned back, edited, looped. The deeper I read, the colder I felt, like the world itself was watching me remember something I wasn't meant to find again. And, somewhere between the lines, I realized, no, one was stopping me because the script had already accounted for this. I don't know what day it is anymore, or if it matters, because days might just be artifacts of the version we're stuck in, meant to mark motion, not progress. I still teach, still walk the same campus paths, still see the same birds trace, the same shapes overhead, but I no longer trust what I remember, or if I'm the only one remembering it. Sometimes I hear the whisper again, faint under static when I change radio stations, or buried in the rustle of lecture hall vents. And every time it says the same thing. They won't let you leave the loop clean. I've stopped trying to explain it to anyone. Those who understand are already quiet, and those who ask questions are already being written out. I don't know how much of me is mine anymore, but I keep thinking about that last line Callahan wrote, scratched in haste, almost an afterthought. The greatest prison is the one that teaches you to forget it was ever built. It began the way most things do, with something that didn't fit. A shipping crate arrived with my uncle's name, though he'd been gone for 7 years. I assumed it was paperwork, maybe sketches from his long-forgotten projects, until I unwrapped the first map. A parchment not just old, but impossible, It charted a place with coastlines I didn't recognize, symbols that moved subtly when I looked away, and annotations written in a language that reminded me of ancient Greek, but wasn't. I laughed at first, then filed it away with the others. But that night, I noticed the coordinates etched faintly in the corner didn't exist on any current globe. They pointed to the South Pacific, but there was no island, no landmass, just ocean. Still, something about that exact spot tugged at me. I told myself it was nonsense, a cartographer's hallucination. But before sleeping, I looked again at the map, and this time, the coastline had changed. I pulled every map, every page, every scrap from that crate, and began cataloguing what I thought was my uncle's madness, but each chart contradicted known history. There were depictions of a green Sahara, pyramids in Antarctica, a city submerged beneath the Sea of Okhotsk. I cross-referenced topographic anomalies, geological data, satellite scans, quietly, in the dark, as if someone might hear the clicks of my keyboard. In an old folder mislabeled as Utility Plans, I found audio tapes, undated, unmarked. One tape featured a man whispering over the crackle of dead air. "We weren't the first. We won't be the last." I played it 5 times, but the words faded more each time, until it became nothing but static and breath. And in the silence that followed, I realized someone had gone through great effort to hide these maps, not protect them. That's when I found the map to a place called Adra on paper that smelled like iron and salt, dated 1943 and drawn in my handwriting. It spiraled quickly from curiosity into paranoia. My research folder was wiped overnight, local backups gone. I found names connected to these maps: Dr. A. Gerhardt, formerly of Project Paperclip; Eleanor Maas, who vanished after a presentation; at MIT, a man listed as S. Bishop, no records, only a brief mention in COINTELPRO documents labeled Suppress Cartography. I filed a FOIA request, received 47 pages, all black ink. The more I searched, the more connections frayed. Someone had been watching map makers since the 1950s, collecting anomalies, suppressing deviations, erasing the outliers. There was a theory buried in a scanned journal attributed to MKU7. Time, as recorded in maps, is flexible, certain. Geographies lead to temporal leakage. Places where memory and future intersect. I started noticing vans parked outside. My calls dropped mid-ring. Then a message appeared on my screen. "We see what you found. Close it." I unplugged everything. I didn't sleep. I went to the university where my uncle once taught. His old office, sealed for years, was now a storage closet. But a janitor let me in. The room was silent, stale with dust, and oddly colder than the hallway. I pulled away a false wall panel behind the shelving unit and found a server, still running, humming softly. It took hours to boot. The interface was ancient, monochrome. There were map files labeled in code, coordinates hidden in file names. I played one video, a drone flight over an uncharted canyon cutting through Utah that ended in a sudden blackout. Audio bursting with high-frequency distortion. The last frame showed a structure, angular, metallic, partially buried. Another video was audio only, voices speaking in reversed cadence, ending with a child's voice saying, "They'll come," back when we forget. Then the server powered off by itself. In the flickering light, I noticed cameras in the ceiling tiles, unblinking. I started writing, compiling everything. The maps, the coordinates, the names, the audio, what I could salvage. I posted it, anonymously, in pieces, on forgotten forums and encrypted boards. Some threads vanished within hours, others filled with noise, disinformation, bots, trolls. One contact from Germany messaged, "I saw the island once. It wasn't land, it was a head." Days later, his profile went dark. My apartment lights began flickering at night. One morning, all my clocks had reset to the same hour, 04:17. A subtle scent of ozone lingered in the air. I recorded myself saying, "What if the truth only matters to those still awake?" and played it back a day later. It was my voice, but older, slower. Then I noticed something in one of the maps. A new path had drawn itself in fine red ink. It curved toward the edge of the parchment and disappeared into white. I followed it. The coordinates led to a remote ridge in Alaska, far from any road. The journey was quiet, too quiet. No birds, no planes, only wind, like whispers across. Frozen stone. I found a cairn, modern, deliberate, and beneath it a metal hatch covered in moss. Inside, the walls were smooth, curved like bone. I descended. No sound but my breath. At the bottom there was a room filled with more maps, suspended in liquid glass. Some showed cities that no longer existed. One showed Earth, but fractured. Oceans spread wide, continents scorched. There was a mirror on the far wall. When I looked, I didn't see myself. I saw a version of me, older, gaunt, standing in a wasteland. He stared back and mouthed a single word I couldn't hear. Then the lights flickered once, twice, and the maps turned black. I came back, at least I think I did. The world felt shifted. Skies dimmer. Time is slower. No one returned my calls. I posted again, and nothing came back. Maybe I crossed into something we don't have words for yet. Maybe these maps aren't just history, they're doors. No one speaks of Adra now, not even in whispers. I still keep the map. It doesn't show coordinates anymore, only a phrase faintly etched across the bottom edge. To remember is to return. I hear static in silence now. Sometimes I dream of coastlines I've never seen and wake with sand in my sheets. I don't know if I found the truth or if the truth found me. All I know is this: some maps weren't made for us, and some paths only appear when we're already too far to turn back. The survey footage was routine, just another dry stretch of desert between nowhere and nothing. But frame 172 caught my eye. A structure, half buried in the sand, appeared only for a split second before the drone camera stuttered and glitched, then resumed as if nothing was there. I replayed the moment 27 times. On the 28th, the image vanished completely. No sign of the structure, no glitch, just clean footage. I filed the report anyway, flagged the frame, marked it artifact suspected, but the submission portal froze before it processed. That night, I dreamt of a hum I couldn't place, steady and low, like machinery running deep underground. The next morning, my laptop wouldn't boot, the drone's hard drive had been wiped, and the desert in the footage had subtly shifted, like the terrain had moved overnight. That was the first time I heard the name whispered over an old audio, log Outpost 47. I drove out alone, following coordinates I wasn't supposed to have, and after a day's silence in the desert, the sand gave way to glass, scorched smooth across a field of charred black stone. My boots echoed as if walking in a hollow space, though nothing showed on the scans. I found a hatch under a layer of wind-swept ash, old but untouched. Inside was airless silence, the corridor descending at an angle that felt wrong. The walls were not made. They were grown, fused with metal that hummed faintly when touched. I logged everything, but when I tried transmitting the data, the files were distorted. Even now I don't know what I saw in the deeper chambers, machines like organs, cables that pulsed faintly, a console with markings that shifted when I stared. At the center of the outpost, something was still running. There was no dust inside, no insects, just me, the static of my recorder, and a growing certainty I'd uncovered something that should have remained forgotten. At the National Archives, I searched for any mention of the site, nothing public, but in a restricted collection, buried. In the margins of a declassified COINTELPRO document, I saw it. 47 Seed Vault, redacted, terminated 11th 800 BP. The coordinates matched. Attached was a memo referencing a project I'd never heard of, Enkidu, allegedly shut down alongside Paperclip. It mentioned temporal bleed and a protocol called deliberate regression. My request for further access was denied, but later that night a plain envelope slid under my door. Inside were photocopies of handwritten field notes, dates that didn't align with any calendar, and a line that stopped my breath cold. We were not the first, and we chose not to be the last. I started noticing the same black sedan parked across from my apartment. Once I waved. It didn't move. Then my phone rang, and no one spoke. Just breathing. I returned to the outpost with better gear and a growing sense I wasn't the first to try. Inside the core chamber, I found a sealed vault with inscriptions that pulsed beneath my flashlight beam, revealing rows of machines that looked both alive and impossibly ancient. I powered up one of the consoles, barely, and a distorted voice came through the static. Protocol failed. Return denied. Cycle reset. Then more static, but woven into it were sounds, rushing water, distant thunder, voices speaking, in a language I almost understood. A video log auto-played, showing a being that looked human, standing before a globe, unlike ours, fractured into spirals of flame and ice. Then it all went dark. My recorder continued ticking, but all audio afterward was corrupted. I saw movement in my peripheral vision for the next hour, but nothing was there when I turned. I sealed the vault behind me on instinct. It felt like something was trying to remember itself. Back at home, I began documenting everything I'd seen. Files failed to upload, drives reformatted themselves. I printed screenshots, mapped what I could, and sent pieces to anonymous archivists, old contacts, anyone I thought might help. Some never responded again. One replied only once, writing, "They forgot on purpose. The forgetting was designed." A week later, they vanished from all platforms. My water started tasting like copper. At night, I heard that hum again, closer now. I whispered into my recorder, "What if the truth only matters to those still awake?" And hours later, found the message played back to me, in my own voice, but layered with another deeper one, saying, "It doesn't." One of the maps I printed changed on its own, marking a spot in Antarctica labelled Origin Repeater. I never marked it myself. I made the decision to go back one final time. I left no note, no digital trail. The world felt thinner now, like skin stretched too tight. Inside the outpost, the machines were louder. A light blinked that hadn't before. I descended deeper, past where the structure should have ended, into a space that wasn't on any layout. The air buzzed with something that made my teeth ache. There was a final chamber, warm like breath. A figure stood at the center, motionless, staring at a slowly rotating sphere of fractured light. I approached. It didn't turn. On the wall were carvings, etched over and over. We broke the sky. I realized this wasn't a facility. It was a warning, a tomb, a confession. And in that moment I understood. They hadn't just disappeared. They erased themselves on purpose, choosing memory loss over annihilation. I left the outpost with nothing. No footage, no audio, only the weight of knowing. The sky above felt unfamiliar, like a copy of itself. People moved a little slower. Radios had more static. No one believed me. Some listened, then forgot by, mourning. I stopped trying. The world doesn't want to remember what came before it. I still hear the hum, like a lullaby, from something older than the stars. It began quietly. In the shadow of the mountain, the locals called the cradle. We were months into the drill schedule, standard mineral extraction, and the days blurred with dust, steel, and routine. No one cared about the old stories, the tribal warnings, the painted stones lining the perimeter. Superstition doesn't survive corporate budgets. Then one morning, the sensors glitched, just for a second. Gravity readings spiked into negative range, then corrected. The log labeled it a software fault. Later that week, a shaft collapsed, with no seismic trigger, no tremor, just a sudden fold, like the earth forgot how to hold itself. Our lead geotech, Ramirez, said the rock wasn't behaving normally and laughed like he regretted saying it. That night, I checked the incident footage. At the frame before the collapse, every object, tools, dust, even shadows, twitched upward for less than a second. Then the feed corrupted, lines dancing like static, trying to remember a shape. I stayed behind after shifts, watching old dig reports, cross-checking anomalies. In a locked archive marked inactive, I found an incident, log from an earlier survey, same coordinates 30 years ago, no known operations on record. It referenced resonance interference and a temporary suspension due to hallucinations among crew. No names listed, no follow-up reports. In a nearby storage bay, covered in a tarp, I found a drill bit warped in a spiral, like it had twisted in reverse mid-operation. I ran a magnetic scan on the shard. Readings went off scale before my equipment shorted out. Ramirez stopped coming in, and I found his trailer empty except for his boots, still warm, and a notebook filled with drawings of the mountain, each one showing it hollow, encasing something shaped like a spire with veins. That night, my bunk creaked, though I wasn't moving. My water glass tipped sideways and didn't fall. For 5 seconds, nothing had weight. I started receiving emails from someone listed as S3, No address, no source. The subject lines were always coordinates. They mapped points around the mountain in a perfect spiral, each matching ancient burial sites the locals refused to enter. I confronted management, but my access badge was revoked within the hour. One of the night crew vanished during a routine check. No alarm, no body. They replaced him the next day without saying a word. I found an old government contract buried in company financials, dated decades before the mine opened. It referenced something called Operation Pillar, approved, under MK Ultra, then refiled under a branch I'd never heard of. In the comments, maintain silence at the cradle, do not breach Vault 0, cycle must not repeat. The word repeat was underlined in red. That night, someone entered my cabin. I heard them breathing, but the door never opened. I drove into town to find someone, anyone who remembered anything. A retired ranger agreed to meet. He brought VHS tapes and warned me not to dig deeper. We played one, dated 1986, labelled Cradle Containment. The footage was warped, the audio full of static. I saw a chamber, stone-lined, glowing faintly, filled with shapes that twisted in and out of frame like they weren't filmed so much as remembered. The camera cut out when one of them turned, not visibly, but in concept, like it rotated through a direction we can't name. The final audio before the tape jammed was a voice, distant, calm. The thoughts are not ours. I played the tape again, and the static whispered my name. When I asked the ranger where the vault was, he froze. "You'll know," he said. "It'll feel like forgetting what gravity is." He was gone the next morning. His house, too, just a hole in the ground. I pieced together what I could, recordings, maps, notes. I uploaded some of it through encrypted networks. Some posts vanished without trace. One archive moderator messaged back, "You're not the first." The mountain was built around it. Then nothing. I tried sending photos, files failed. My phone rang from my own number, and when I answered, I heard myself say, "You were always part of this." My laptop powered on by itself that night, displaying only one message. Do not speak its name. Sound gives shape. My hands trembled without reason. I couldn't remember my mother's face. I whispered into the mic, "What if truth only
matters to those still awake?" And the speakers responded in a deep, pulsing tone that made my nose bleed. I stopped sleeping. The mountain began humming, so low it lived in my bones. I think I crossed a threshold I didn't see. I went back.
One final time, following the spiral path marked in the emails. The mountain was quiet, watching. I descended into a shaft no one else knew, lightless and smooth, as if melted from inside. The air thickened with each step, gravity folding in strange ways. My footsteps echoed before I made them. At the end was the vault, a vast obsidian curve.
Wrapped in symbols that bent away from my eyes. It wasn't locked. I was asleep, and it was dreaming in gravity. As the seal hissed open, I felt my thoughts shift, not erased, but rerouted.
A presence moved through me, heavy and slow, not cruel, just indifferent. It had waited long enough. On the walls were carvings, people building mountains, burying it, sealing themselves inside. A choice, a sacrifice. I understood, but not with words. I turned back, but I was not alone. It came with me, quiet as air, weightless and infinite. I don't know what I brought back. I still work. I still speak. But some days I feel like a puppet with forgotten strings. The stars above the
cradle seem closer now.
My dreams are filled with shapes folding inwards, and I wake with my bed pressed against the ceiling. Others have gone silent. Some pretend not to notice. Maybe they made the same choice I did. Maybe it doesn't matter anymore. The mountain is still there, unchanged, but everything else has started leaning toward it. I don't share the recordings anymore. I don't write. I just listen. And sometimes I wonder if the true prison wasn't the vault, but our understanding of what it held. Whatever we woke up wasn't sleeping. It was waiting, and it remembers us better than we remember ourselves. I used to log archived case tapes for the Bureau. Nothing dramatic, just categorizing forgotten reels with dull timestamps and dust-thick silence. But last Tuesday, something shifted. A box that shouldn't have existed showed up without an entry. Tag marked C1127. Inside was a film reel, its case scuffed and greasy, tagged only 47 Dallas Nov 22. I remember pausing at the label. There was no witness 47 in any official testimony, not even among the unofficial files passed. Around late at night, I loaded it into the old playback unit, more out of routine than curiosity, and the screen flickered to life with colourless frames of a man sitting in the back of a diner, mumbling incoherently while traffic moved behind him like a dream. No sound, just his lips forming shapes I couldn't read. Then, in the last frame before the film burned, his eyes met the camera. It was like he knew someone would be watching years later. I shut off the machine, heart calm but unsettled, and for the first time in years, the silence in that archive room didn't feel empty. It felt like it was listening. I waited until after hours to pull the reel again, this time with the old waveform decoder connected, hoping to catch even a ghost of audio, maybe magnetic residue. What came through was a high-frequency whine layered under static, and then, buried beneath that, one intelligible line. They cut 46. I stayed silent. I checked the internal catalogue against the witness logs from 63, and sure enough, there was no entry past 45. Yet in a backup index, buried deep inside a deprecated server cluster, I found a name blacked out in 2 layers, one analog, the other overwritten digitally in 2001. The redaction wasn't perfect, though, and part of a sentence slipped through. Witness 47, fragmented, inconsistent, potentially compromised by redacted memory conditioning. The file ended with a numeric reference I didn't recognize, followed by coordinates in Cuba, and a final line. Do not attempt retrieval.
Integrity breached. I printed nothing, copied nothing. I just sat there, listening to the fan hum overhead, wondering how deep something had to be buried for even the silence to forget it existed. The name on the redacted file, though partial, linked
back to a defunct psychological warfare program tied loosely to MK Ultra's offshoots, not the ones they talk about on podcasts, but the darker branch, the ones that tested on memory integrity and subliminal coding. Witness 47 was referenced again in a handwritten memo I found tucked inside a misplaced interagency envelope dated 1964, marked Eyes Only. It spoke of early subject fragmentation trials, post-assassination interviews, memory wiping through, audio loop hypnosis, and a project called Perennial Slate that involved false narrative seeding across multiple witnesses. There was one chilling note in the margin, scrawled in green ink. He remembers the gun, not the shooter. I found cross-referenced IDs with missing person cases from the 70s, journalists, former operatives, even a linguist who vanished mid-flight in Berlin, all supposedly connected to oral histories that were never published, always blocked by content suppression. I started hearing clicks on my landline again, something I hadn't noticed since my first year on this job, and every time I looked out the office window at night, a black sedan sat across the street with its lights off. Still, waiting. The address tied to the Cuba coordinates pointed me not to an active location, but to a dead archive node, a forgotten Cold War records, annexed beneath a decommissioned listening post in the Keys. The building was silent when I entered, untouched by renovation or time. Fluorescent lights flickered overhead, casting long, nauseous shadows. I found the server stack they left behind, dust-choked but humming weakly. The final recording in the system was labeled Echo 47 MP4, and it played without prompt. It was the man from the reel again, older now, gaunt, eyes vacant. The audio cracked and warbled with each syllable, as if the truth itself was resisting transmission. "They stored us like reels," he said, voice glitching, "spliced our thoughts into different boxes, kept us talking until we forgot what was real." Behind him I saw a wall covered in red-dotted maps and Polaroids of people with blank expressions, some marked as processed, others lost. The footage cut abruptly, replaced by white noise that whispered, "Find them. They remember, too." I backed away, suddenly aware that every movement I made echoed wrong, too loud, like the building was amplifying the sound for someone else to hear. I tried to upload the video that night, but the network was dead, my drives wiped, my laptop screen flickering black with a cursor that blinked in Morse. Stop. I sent a single analog copy to a contact I barely trusted, someone who owed me silence more than loyalty. Then I waited. By morning, his number was disconnected and his apartment sealed with official tape that read, "Biohazard inspection." I thought of walking away, deleting everything, pretending this was just static and ghosts, but something kept ringing in my ears. They remember too. I started hearing that same distorted voice in unrelated recordings, old interviews, public broadcasts, even in hold music. The patterns were subtle, like someone had hidden a memory across the signal itself. And I couldn't shake the thought, what if these witnesses weren't lost, just hidden in plain signal? What if truth only matters to those still awake, and everyone else has already been tuned out? It all converged in a single fragment I hadn't noticed before, a clip of 47 mouthing numbers, the sequence now familiar, GPS coordinates, but not to a location, this time a database. A ghost, network of testimonies mapped worldwide, stored across dead mail servers, inactive towers, and forgotten hard drives inside public archives. Each one was a different suppressed witness, each linked to an event the official record had smoothed over. They weren't just hidden, they were encoded, fragmented into irrelevance. And in trying to bring them back, I realized the deeper betrayal. The system hadn't just erased their words, it had erased their meanings. I uploaded the entire chain of files to a private mirror and sent the key to an anonymous drop. But as I watched the upload bar crawl forward, a single line appeared on my screen, replacing everything else. You are now part of the record. I didn't sleep that night. I just stared at the screen, and for the first time I understood. I wasn't uncovering history. I was becoming one of its editors. They never came for me directly. No arrests, no warnings, no public silence. Just an absence that grew louder each day. Files I couldn't access, calls that rang but were never answered, news segments subtly rewritten. The video of 47 gone from every traceable mirror, the people I reached out to unreachable. I began to wonder if I'd ever truly seen any of it, or if the act of discovering it had been just another layer in the design, a trap, not to kill, but to isolate. Truth, I've learned, isn't buried under lies. It's buried under the weight of forgetting. And now I'm even starting to forget his face. Sometimes I replay the tape in my head, hoping a new frame will emerge, a different word, some hidden message I missed. But all I ever hear now is static. And beneath it, a whisper that sounds a lot like my own voice, asking a question that won't let go. I used to transcribe dreams. That was my job officially, filtering sleep lab audio, decoding mumblings from REM studies, converting chaotic fragments into coherent logs for obscure research branches that didn't list return addresses. Most nights were an empty routine, breathing, mutters, sometimes tears. But last month, I logged a dream sequence tagged as Session D93. It began normally, a man describing a staircase inside a fog-covered house, but near the end, his voice, sharpened and slowed, forming a clear sentence in a different cadence. They were never gods,
only builders. It wasn't part of the dream script. The patient wasn't supposed to speak that clearly under sedation. I replayed it again and again, same words, same rhythm, like something placed there. The next morning, the session file was missing from our database, as if it never existed.
I didn't report it. I just saved a copy to my own drive and waited. That night, I dreamt of stairs I'd never climbed, wooden ones, old and whispering. They creaked in a pattern that felt like language. The file labeled D93 wasn't the only one. I found others, old tapes misfiled under animal behavior logs, psychology case studies, even maritime sonar reports. Hidden in each was a similar phrase spoken just before waking. They are still watching the lattice, blue light over the orchard. One door remains open. No dream analyst flagged these. They were filtered out by the pre-processing software. I disabled the filters and spent nights decoding corrupted archives, re-rendering raw dream audio. The deeper I went, the more consistent the signals became. Subconscious phrases shared across subjects, across decades. Patterns started forming. Maps, times, shapes, whispers through sleep, hinting at something older than the language itself. One patient, unknown and unlogged, recited a full sentence in Sumerian. She had no history of speaking it. Another drew symbols onto her hospital gown, which I later discovered matched petroglyphs found in Peruvian caves. Something was nesting inside our dreams, and someone at some point knew. The more files I uncovered, the more things began to fracture. Old notes referenced a shutdown program named Project Morpheus Gate, a Cold War-era initiative to weaponize subconscious suggestion. It was supposedly abandoned in the 70s, but I found internal memos dated much later, hidden inside DoD grant PDFs and neuroscience journals with no peer review. One researcher, last name Hossein, gave a TED talk in 2009 about dream memory consolidation. She vanished a week later. No investigation, no follow-up. Another paper, co-authored by 3 neurologists from different countries, ended with an odd footnote. All findings belong to the architects. I traced each of their names. All 3 were declared deceased within months, though 2 death certificates were unsigned. Surveillance footage from their labs either glitched or was wiped. One building they worked in no longer exists on satellite view. I don't think this was about science. I think these people were touching something not meant to be decoded. The oldest mention of the architects came from a rusted tape in an abandoned sleep lab beneath a university hospital, sealed off after a fire in the 80s. I got in through a janitor who wanted cash, not answers. The hallway lights stuttered like a pulse as I moved deeper underground, air thick with old smoke and mold. The playback unit barely functioned, but the tape still ran. Static danced across the screen before an image formed. A man asleep in a
room full of flickering candles, his head wired to an archaic EEG rig. Then came the voice, low, warping, dissonant. You dream because we sleep. When we wake, you will remember none of this. The man convulsed. Behind him, carved into the walls, were thousands of the same 4 symbols I'd seen in patients' drawings. The feed cut to black. Then it spoke again, not in sound but in pressure, a low thrum that buzzed behind my eyes. You are trespassing. I stumbled back, heart steady but breath shallow, certain now that we had not invented dreaming. We had inherited it. I tried uploading. What I found, audio files, transcripts, still frames of the candle room, but the drive wouldn't mount, and every system I used either froze or erased itself mid-process. One colleague, the only person I told, stopped answering after 2 days. His apartment? Vacant? Mail uncollected? His voicemail is just static and faint breathing. I kept going. I had to. But the harder I pushed, the more the systems pushed back. Some dreams weren't even mine anymore. I'd wake up with lines in my notebook I didn't remember writing, fragments of languages I couldn't translate. I stopped using electronics to write, switched to analog, but even then, ink would fade by morning. I wondered more than once if all this had already happened. If I was only catching echoes of others who had seen too much. What if truth only matters to those still awake? That line repeated in one patient's dream for 11 nights. And lately, I've started to think sleep might not be rest at all, but containment. I didn't find a solution. I found a doorway. The coordinates embedded in a decoded dream sketch pointed not to a place, but a file drop, one that had been transmitting shortwave tones since 1983.
I captured it with an old ham radio rig. Each tone formed a word, and together they built something like an instruction manual, or maybe a warning. It spoke of the breach of silence, of dreams that fracture when touched by observation. The last part, translated from the tones, said, "To map the lattice is to awaken the weavers." I stopped decoding after that. My hands trembled. I see hours. No one has contacted me. No one stopped me. But something has changed. Sleep feels different now. Not deeper, thinner. Like something is pressing against it from the other side. I wonder if that was the goal of those who vanished. Not to expose the architects, but to delay them. To keep them dreaming a little longer, so the rest of us wouldn't have to wake. They're not coming for me. Not like before. They don't need to. The files are silent now, gone. The dreams I recorded have turned grey, featureless, like a wiped chalkboard. My memory slips in strange places, dates, names, voices I knew well. Sometimes I see my own face in unfamiliar mirrors, younger or older, or just slightly wrong. I don't know what I've revealed or what I've lost in trying. The last image I have of the architects isn't even visual. It's a sensation, like pressure under deep water, or the hum of a building before it falls. I believe they are still sleeping, but not for long. And maybe that's what all this has been. One long whisker trying to keep us from hearing the sound of them stirring. I still dream, but I no longer trust it. And some nights I wonder if they built the dreams. Who built them? It started with a misprint, my own name, in an archived academic transcript from a university I never attended, under a thesis title I'd never written, but one I would have if I'd had the nerve. I was cataloguing old digital microfiche for the city archive, sifting through the grey sludge of bureaucracy when I noticed it, buried between census scans and obituaries, blurry, warped, yet unmistakably mine. It should have been a dead link, but the file opened, and inside a photograph. I don't remember taking in a room I've never seen, beside people whose faces seemed just slightly off, as though reassembled from something lost. I dismissed it. Some clerical glitch, a corrupted scan, nothing worth the itch crawling under my skin. But that night I dreamt of the photo, except the faces moved, blinking slow like they'd just noticed I was watching. The next morning I went back, pretending I was there to fix metadata tags, but really I was pulling at a frayed thread the system had tried to tuck back in. Tucked behind layers of deprecated file formats and unindexed storage trees, I found dozens of corrupted PDFs marked retracted, obsolete, or simply lost, each containing fragments of people who didn't exist, court testimonies, without trials, school records from shuttered campuses, biographies with no living relatives, no graves, no births. Someone had carefully deleted their footprints, yet here they were, walking backwards into my awareness, and with every file I opened, the air in the archive grew heavier, the silence more deliberate, like something was waiting for me to stop, looking. They say every lie leaves a scar in the data, and by then I was tracing a map of scars. MK Ultra wasn't a myth, Paperclip wasn't just about Nazis, and COINTELPRO didn't die with the 60s. Beneath those known programs I found echoes of something deeper. Operation Juniper, Project Solace, the Manifold Directive. Names that surfaced briefly before being swallowed by blank pages and redacted timelines. I read reports of individuals phased out, not killed, not relocated, just removed cleanly, like faulty entries in a ledger. Journalists vanished mid-investigation, whistleblowers disappeared with no media pulse, entire families struck from utility records, phone logs, GPS archives. This wasn't history, it was erasure, orchestrated not with guns, but with silence. And now I could feel it watching me. I found the vault by accident, or maybe it found me, beneath a condemned library wing, walled off since the early 80s for asbestos abatement, though no work had ever been logged. The keypad was dead, the lock rusted, but someone had pried. The panel opened and rewired it with a single blinking diode, like an eye twitching in the dark. Inside, the air was still, the light low, the smell of paper and rust clinging to every breath. Rows of filing cabinets lined the walls, each drawer labelled not with names but with dates and phrases. The 9th letter, chorus protocol, echo list. I powered up the room's only terminal, CRT, flickering with a faint, high-pitched whine, and played the first file, a voice, warped and slow, whispering names. Names I'd seen in the corrupted PDFs. Names I'd seen in my dreams. I tried uploading the audio, scrambling to get it online, to burn it into forums, seed torrents, drop drives in libraries, but every time something failed. Files corrupted mid-transfer. Posts deleted seconds after going live. One email bounced back with a subject line I hadn't written. We're still listening. Then Thomas disappeared. He'd been my quiet accomplice, a systems librarian who owed me nothing but curiosity. He left behind a single sticky note on his empty monitor. If truth dies, it's because we weren't awake enough to hold it. After that, I stopped sleeping in my apartment, started checking my mirrors twice, started whispering aloud when I was alone, just to break the quiet. I wasn't paranoid, I was paying attention. The final file was hidden behind a maze of hashes and false directories, labelled only with a question mark. And when I opened it, I didn't see data, I saw faces, live camera feeds from across the world. Train stations, street corners, cafes, crosswalks, and in them the same people from the erased files, older now, altered, but unmistakable. They were hiding in plain sight, living double lives, teachers, janitors, bus drivers, eyes alert, always scanning, waiting. One of them looked straight into the camera, then smiled like they'd been waiting for me too. I shut the terminal down and sat there in the dim blue light, realizing this wasn't about exposing them. It was about becoming them, and that if I walked away now, I might stay free, or simply become another story buried in the dust. I don't know if what I found will ever surface again, if someone will trip over the same anomaly, chase the same thread, feel the same hum behind their eyes when the silence gets too perfect. Maybe the names will rot in those drawers, maybe they'll rise again, but I keep dreaming of them lined up in the dark, eyes closed, waiting for the signal. I've stopped trying to warn anyone. Truth isn't a shout, it's a flicker, and by the time you notice it, it's already fading. The system doesn't erase with fire, it erases with forgetting, and some things vanish because we let them. The last name in the vault was mine, and it hadn't been crossed out yet. It started with a missed ping, just a routine seismic scan, buried in a stack of morning alerts I'd grown numb to. But this one had a rhythm to it, a geometric echo that caught the corner of my mind and stayed there like a whisper I couldn't unhear. It came from Station 6 near the Ross Ice Shelf, tagged Test Pattern Deviation. And when I clicked the log, the spectrogram blinked just once before the screen went white, then black, and the file closed itself without warning. Later, I asked around, just in passing, but no one else even remembered seeing it. The usual answers floated back. System bug, packet loss, maybe a glitch. But something about it lingered quiet and steady, like the way silence sounds different when someone's standing behind you. That night, I sat alone in the outpost lounge, the glass fogged from inside, watching a static line of stars drift over the ice horizon, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something underneath us had moved. And not in a geological sense, but something older, conscious maybe, beginning to stir. I ran a manual trace on the seismic feed from that region the next day, expecting a null set, but instead it spat out a legacy cache marked "Not for Dissemination." Buried in the archive were scans from decades ago, low-resolution prints showing symmetrical impressions, perfect circles and clean angles, cut miles below the ice. One file had a satellite photo with visible grid patterns like city blocks, half obscured by artifacting that looked intentional. The metadata listed a defunct orbital platform with no official registry, and when I chased its identifier through our system, I was bounced between dead links and 404s until my access credentials quietly vanished. I didn't tell anyone. Instead, I started pulling old drives from deep storage, tapes sealed in wax, boxes marked with projects we weren't supposed to talk about. What I found didn't read like science. It read like controlled panic. References to polar anomalies appeared in scattered memos, non-human city structures beneath glacial crust, anomalous geometric resonance disrupting cognitive tests, even one MK Ultra transcript that casually mentioned the southern grid while describing visual hallucinations mapped to stellar diagrams. I kept reading until one day, Elena, my colleague, just didn't show up. Her desk was cleared, her name gone from the login sheets. The others acted like she never existed. When I looked up, the security camera in the corner had moved. The red light blinked steadily. Even alone, I began whispering. I broke into the condemned sub-basement server room one night. The air colder than outside, heavy with dust and something sharp in the silence, like the room was listening. In the far end, among the old towers, I found a disconnected drive still. Blinking, labels scraped off. I patched it in. Static, then video, a flicker of shapes, a face, maybe. Audio garbled and warped, layered with voices, speaking through water. Beneath it, a report read out loud in a detached tone, describing celestial cartography matched to subglacial architectural geometry. One diagram froze on screen, a city blueprint overlaid with constellations, but the stars didn't match. Any known chart. I cross-referenced sky maps, checked archived catalogues, nothing. These stars weren't mapped because they weren't ours. Not yet. I wrapped the files in dummy code and tried to upload them to an off-site mirror. The transfer failed. Power cut. The next morning, my workstation had been scrubbed clean, cables disconnected, the desk wiped down like no one had ever sat there. I asked Jensen from Systems if there'd been a sweep, and he just smiled too long, said I'd been working hard, maybe too hard, asked if I'd spoken to medical. That night, my room had been searched. Drawer slightly ajar, the envelope I'd hidden, gone. I remember standing in the corridor under the flickering emergency lights, not scared, not angry, just profoundly awake. What if truth only matters to those still awake? The others, maybe they were dreaming. Maybe that was easier. I went back one last time to find the source. Not just data, but evidence. I fed deep radar through old Russian scans and rebuilt the terrain below us. The geometry emerged slowly. A city, no, something larger, aligned not with the poles, not with magnetic lines, but with celestial patterns we hadn't yet charted. The design wasn't just aesthetic, it was astronomical, temporal. This city was built to match a sky that didn't belong to this era, as if it remembered something from the stars we hadn't reached, or something from before we fell out of sync with the universe. And when I saw the full schematic, every angle, every arc, perfectly mirrored to constellations that don't rise in our sky, I realized this wasn't about hiding the past. This was about containing the future. I left. I walked out and never went back. Not just the base, but the entire program. And even now, somewhere quieter, I don't sleep through the night. Sometimes I hear static in recordings I didn't make, or find sketches in my notebook I don't remember drawing, circles and star patterns that don't belong anywhere near our current map. The files are gone. The signals faded, but in some places the pulse is still faint, still there. I don't know if anyone else remembers, or if they chose not to. And maybe it doesn't matter, because truth isn't what survives. It's what's allowed, and what's buried beneath ice or time tends to stay that way. Some echoes aren't meant to return, but they still do. Quiet, patient, waiting. It started with a silent frame. Routine footage review, archival transfer, lunar mission logs from the 1970s, supposedly declassified. I'd done this 100 times before, tagging dull telemetry and staticky crew chatter. But this time, one clip didn't match the manifest labelled AE39 Blue. No mission by that name. No astronauts listed. The video had no sound, only a slow pan across a grey, shadow-drenched crater, darker than it should have been, the camera shaking slightly like someone was holding their breath. At the 2-minute mark, it cut abruptly to black. I checked the
logs again. Nothing. No launch, no return, no crew, just a dead tag. And yet someone had spliced it in intentionally. I didn't report it. I told myself it was a glitch, a misfire.
But when I tried to re-watch it, the clip was gone. I stayed late that night. I told myself I just wanted to find the clip again, but I knew better. The code behind the archival system isn't complex, but someone had buried this deep. Hidden directories, fragmented log names, loops of silence recorded over static. I found references to Project Hypnos, a defunct lunar mapping program, supposedly abandoned in '68. But buried in the logs were coordinates, diagrams, and strange notations in a language I didn't recognize. One file was titled simply Library Echo. When I opened it, all I got was a 6-second clip. A stone corridor under dim light, books, or what looked like them, stacked against raw lunar rock, pages frozen mid-air in zero-G. Then a voice, garbled and thin. We were never alone, we were never first. I downloaded what I could. The server crashed 10 minutes later. Power outage, no explanation. Everything that followed felt rehearsed, like the silence that comes too fast after a question. The next morning, my clearance was downgraded. No reason given. My terminal credentials were revoked. The contact I'd quietly messaged from Langley, the one who used to talk off record about NASA's parallel logs, stopped replying. I remembered his half-jokes about Project Paperclip scientists bringing more than physics with them, about MKUltra using dream sequences they claimed were lunar transmissions. I went back to the files, but they were gone, even the local copies. Only one thing remained, a receipt log of access, my ID, my machine. Someone wanted me to know I'd been seen. I started seeing a black SUV idling near my apartment. Once I found my front door open, but nothing was taken. They weren't trying to scare me. They were letting me know I was already part of it. The last piece came from a building slated for demolition. An old research annex used by defense contractors back in the 80s. Forgotten, gutted. I found it, mentioned in a memo about post-return debriefings under a strange heading, Lunar Echo Repatriation. The place smelled like dust and metal and mold. I found a server, dead but salvageable. The files were scrambled, looping over each other. I rebuilt what I could. Most were corrupt, but one folder opened, distorted audio clips, a series of grainy, flickering videos. In one, an astronaut stares at something off frame, frozen, his voice nearly lost in static. This isn't a cave, it's organized. In another, books float through thin air, untouched by time, bound in something that doesn't look like paper. One clip ends with the phrase, repeated 3 times. This is not Earth's story. This is the moon remembering. I sat there in the dark, headphones on, feeling like I wasn't alone. I uploaded what I had to a private cloud, set timers, scheduled leaks, backups, pings to trusted contacts, what few I had left. Then the signals started dropping. My phone wouldn't hold a call. My laptop bricked itself mid-upload. One of my backups was wiped remotely. And the contact I'd trusted most disappeared. No goodbye, no trace. I started to question what I was trying to prove. Who would listen? Who would believe? I remember sitting in a coffee shop, staring at the exit sign thinking, what if the truth only matters to those still awake? Not the world, not the media, just those who feel the edges fray. Those who know something is broken but can't name it. That's who I was doing this for. But I didn't know if they were still out there. In the end, the final truth came, not from a file but from a voice. An old transmission embedded in a forgotten satellite ping, audio only. A woman's voice, tired, calm, certain. She spoke of a base on the far side, a place carved into lunar stone, older than tools, older than language. She said the libraries weren't built, they were left behind. That the moon was once home, and Earth, the experiment. She spoke of migrations, losses, resets. You were never meant to return, she said. You were meant to forget. And I felt it then. Not awe, not fear, emptiness, like standing in a museum of yourself. I didn't know if she was real. I didn't care. The pieces had never fit. They weren't supposed to. This wasn't a puzzle. It was a lock. The files are scattered now, half deleted, half corrupted. The servers are gone. The buildings were repurposed. I walk past them sometimes, the walls still standing, the windows dark. No one talks about the moon anymore. It's become a myth again, just rock and crater and silence. But sometimes, late at night, I hear that old static in my headphones, the faint edge of a voice I can't trace. I've stopped chasing it. I've stopped trying to explain. Because maybe the truth isn't buried. It's encoded in what we're not allowed to ask. Maybe the question isn't what's on the moon. You don't notice it at first, the way silence changes shape in a locked room, the way something small, almost harmless, cuts through routine like a thin blade. For us, it was a mislabeled uplink file. Harmless, really. Just a clipped comms, segment buried in a backlog of debris scans. I was running diagnostics on telemetry feeds from the upper Stratos band when the anomaly blinked into view, brief, almost casual. The data timestamp was off by exactly 7 hours. The audio track played, then stopped, then reversed, in a burst of static. A phrase surfaced in the distortion, repeated twice, like a skipped vinyl. Elusis confirmed. I didn't know that name. I logged it, tagged it, and moved on. But it stayed with me, like a cough in the walls. That night, as the outside winds scraped the hull, I found myself muting the monitor just to listen. Not to the feed, but to the silence it left behind. 3 days passed before I opened the logs again. I hadn't meant to. I was only cleaning storage, sifting dead satellites and decoms, when I found the folder again. This time nested deep beneath failed launch diagnostics. The folder was nameless, just a blank space between other logs, a digital breath held too.
Long, inside compressed files half corrupt, rocket telemetry, but with strange trajectories. Not orbital, vertical. Every recorded path stopped dead at the same altitude, 36 kilometers, like they'd all hit something that wasn't there. No explosions, no debris fell, just termination, flatline. I scrubbed through each sequence.
Same pattern, a sky with a ceiling. The deeper I went, the quieter the station felt, like even the lights were holding their breath. I remember looking out the viewport that night, up at the stars, and wondering, for the first time, if they were really there at all. The older files were colder. 1986, 1971, even one marked 1958, encoded in obsolete formats I had to convert. By hand, these weren't supposed to be in our system. They referenced programs I'd only heard whispered: High Jump, Fishbowl, Eclipse. Some bore seals of real history, Operation Paperclip, MK Ultra. Others were more imaginative. But they all circled the same idea, that beyond our atmosphere something permanent waits. One file showed a rocket test, cut short, the impact muffled by audio distortion, but the trajectory clearly halted mid-air, then slid down as if against glass. Another bore witness logs from ground teams. One line repeated in several. It didn't go through. I checked personnel names. Dead ends. Most had vanished from any post-mission records. Others were marked deceased, but without dates. I started using the old terminal in the back lab, disconnected from Central.
Not because I had to, but because I felt watched. And that's when I saw the first camera turn, just slightly, just once. There was a sub-basement no one talked about, beneath the maintenance level, past the floodlights that never turned on.
I used a backup badge from a retired engineer, found taped behind a loose panel. The air down there felt heavier, stale with neglect. Cables hung like vines from open ceilings. I found the terminal in a forgotten lab, dust thick, humming faintly as if still waiting. It ran on a private server called Elusis Core. I fed it the uplink files. The screen lit up with static, audio clips stitched together like a broken prayer. In one, a voice whispered, "The sky folds. It isn't space, it's sealant." Another showed a camera view from a rocket, clear ascent, then a shudder and a sudden stop. Not impact, a stop, as if the air had turned solid. The footage cut to black, followed by a hiss that sounded too much like breathing. Behind me, something buzzed. Lights, maybe, or something else. I didn't turn around. I tried uploading what I had to a black box server is configured years ago, but the uplink failed twice. Then the power dipped, just long enough for every screen in the lab to reset to blank. When I returned to the living deck, Faye was gone. No notice. No log of departure. Her quarters were cleared, like she'd never
existed. I checked the personnel manifest. It had been edited, cleanly, precisely. No trace. I found a note in my console inbox, unsigned, with only one sentence. "Do not reach the ceiling." I slept less after that. Dreamed of the open sky that cracked when touched, of hands clawing upward, only to smear against something cold and invisible. I kept wondering, if truth lives in the open, why does it vanish when found? Maybe the real question isn't what we're hiding from the world. Maybe it's what the world is hiding from us. What if truth only matters to those still awake? The auxiliary shuttle was coded for 2 passengers. I launched it alone. Navigation was manual. I set coordinates based on the final Elusis data. 36 kilometers northern arc, entry point marked by the last successful ping. There was no resistance, until there was a sudden shudder. Instruments blinked, fluttered, not from turbulence, but from contact. The sky didn't break, it bent. The hull screamed, but not from pressure, like it was scraping against something fibrous. I saw patterns in the clouds. Not the weather, not light, grids. Structural filaments. A seal. My fingers hovered over the release charge that would send the probe upward. But then I stopped. Not out of fear, out of doubt. If we puncture it, what comes in? Or what goes out? The question grew heavier than the mission. And in that weight, something shifted. Not outside. Inside. I knew then we'd never been escaping. We'd been testing the walls. I never returned. Or maybe I did, and they rewrote it. Sometimes I think I'm still up there, in that moment before impact, the shuttle frozen against the edge of the sky. I kept the recordings. I hid them where even I might forget.
Not because I wanted to protect the truth, but because it changed shape every time I looked at it. Station Eleusis was never a place. It was a question disguised as a name. A system disguised as silence. The world kept spinning. News came and went. Rockets launched. Missions failed. Satellites blinked out like stars caught in a lie. It was just another shift at the regional archives, quiet and humming with the low whir of temperature-controlled air, the kind of silence that becomes part of your body after a few years underground. I was cataloguing a batch of mislabeled government. Tapes, spool reels in faded boxes, the kind you're supposed to flag for incineration, when I found one with no record ID, just a date that didn't match any file set and a strip of red tape across the top, like it had been sealed in a hurry, I logged it anyway, half out of boredom, half from the itch you get when something doesn't quite fit. And that night, after the lights were out and the building was asleep, I threaded it into the backup player in Bay 3, just for a glance. Black screen! Then a flicker of what looked like faces, still and staring, like they were waiting for me to look back. I don't remember finishing it, don't even remember leaving the room, but the next morning I woke up in my apartment fully dressed, light-headed, the skin on my hands slightly red, like I'd been holding something hot, and a single sentence, looping in my mind with no context. You won't remember this part. The strange thing wasn't just the blank spot in my memory, it was the clarity of everything else. The dreams that followed were more vivid than my waking hours. Flashes of cold hallways and pale corridors lit with flickering sodium lights, people moving in unison like puppets underwater. I went back to Bay 3, but the tape was gone. No log entry, no trace of the reel. And when I asked around, the others acted like Bay 3 didn't even have a backup player, let alone a working reel system, which was a lie because I used it weekly for restoration checks. I started searching the internal archive index by hand, keyword by keyword, and buried deep in an outdated server mirror, I found a corrupted batch labeled MK Zeta Sessions, with timestamps that matched my missing hours. Every time I tried to extract a file, the system would freeze, then crash, and when I finally got one frame to render, it was just a shot of a room, empty, but in the corner was a timestamp from a town I'd never visited and a noise meter spiking, like something had screamed before the footage cut out. I started noticing small changes. My badge number in the log system was off by 1 digit. Old emails were gone, and one night my passcode didn't work at all, like the system had forgotten I existed. So I dug further into uncirculated records from the 1960s and 70s, and that's where I found mentions of episodic overwrite trials and cooperative memory culling, hidden in the margins of declassified MK Ultra reports that had supposedly been scrubbed. Names were redacted, but the patterns were there. Regional data centers, monthly pulse distributions, and something called a sub-perceptual recall inhibitor tested in public libraries, museums, and archive facilities across the country. I even found a Department of Transportation memo buried in Project COINTELPRO logs describing incidental exposure to mnemonic feedback loops during urban transit, whatever that meant, and suddenly the static I kept hearing in my headphones during cataloguing sessions didn't feel so harmless, like maybe I hadn't been remembering wrong, but remembering exactly what someone needed me to forget. I went to the city records vault under the old courthouse. a place I knew had been disconnected from the central network for years, and there I found it, a rusted media cart pushed into the back of a supply tunnel, its drawers full of unlabeled tapes, most degraded, but one still marked in faint pencil. Cycle 42, retention failed. I ran it on a portable deck in the dark, alone but not feeling alone, and as the reel turned, the screen lit up with grainy black and white footage of people seated in a theatre, unblinking, while a slow pulse clicked behind a voice that repeated the same phrase over and over in "This is not happening to you," until the sound cracked into a scream and then silence. When the screen went black, I saw my own reflection, not in the glass, but somehow inside the footage, just standing among them, eyes open, staring directly into a lens that hadn't moved in 50 years, and my hands began to shake like they were trying to remember something they weren't allowed to. I tried sending the recovered files to a contact at a university research lab, someone who used to work in archival system security, but the data wouldn't hold. It degraded on every transfer, footage replaced by static, audio replaced by silence, like something was unraveling the memory in real time. Then the lab went dark, off the grid, no warning, no response, just erased from the faculty directory overnight. Back at the archives, someone had replaced my desk chair, moved my pens, the light flickered in a way it never had before, and when I looked in the bathroom mirror that afternoon, there was a faint scar on my temple I don't remember getting. I sat in the break room for what felt like hours, watching people pass by who used to say hello and now didn't even look at me. And I found myself thinking, not about the danger, not about the conspiracy, but about the silence between it all and the voice in my dream that whispered over and over, what if truth only matters to those still awake? It wasn't just me. Online forums started popping up, people describing the same dreams, the same lapses, waking in stairwells with old file numbers scribbled on their arms, hearing low tones in public elevators, losing entire days after visiting, local museums or archive basements. A thread I followed led me to a man in a desert town who claimed his sister worked in a classified archiving wing and hadn't spoken a word in 2 years. Her notebooks filled with sketches of spirals, repetition, triggers, timestamps that aligned with mine exactly. I started forgetting things mid-sentence, found notes I'd written that I didn't understand, whole folders on my drive marked "Do not reopen." But the breakthrough came not in a file, but in a memory that didn't belong to me. A hallway I had never walked, a conversation I had never had, yet could recall in perfect detail. And suddenly I wasn't sure if I'd uncovered something, or if I was part of it, if all of this had been shown to me, not so I could reveal it, but so I could absorb it, carry it, and quietly disappear into its design. I've since left the archives, or at least I think I have. I work somewhere quieter now, or maybe I don't work at all. Maybe this is still part of the loop, part of the test. The dreams have changed, less coherent, more like memories breaking, apart mid-thought, and sometimes I wake up already dressed, already holding something I don't remember picking up. I keep finding names I don't recognize in my contacts, recordings on my phone with no sound, notes in the margins of books I've never read, always the same phrase repeating at the edge of the page. They were never meant to remember. People keep disappearing, or they keep forgetting they ever existed. And the more I try to hold on to what I know, the more it slips away. Not violently, just softly, like fog warning off glass. I don't know what's real anymore, not really. But I know the silence is louder than ever, and I've started to wonder if the memory was never mine to begin with, or if the forgetting was.